Hot takes are everywhere, but they're often uninformed, and major news is biased. We've had enough of hot takes. We want informed takes. Join Kevin Briggins and Devin Smith as they have rational conversations about domestic politics, geopolitics, and military affairs. Things will get interesting as they bring in expert guests, even from across the aisle. Grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and hop into the chat. It's time for Informed Takes.
Yo, welcome back to Informed Takes. I am Kevin Briggins. He is Devin Smith, and we are glad that you all are back with us again. Man, how you been?
Been good, man. Just working hard, doing a lot of shooting in the studio, and looking forward to celebrating the 4th next week. How about you, man?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we can go ahead and tell the audience about next week, right? It'll be a little different.
Yeah.
So next week, next Thursday, Devin is going to be here at the Chateau Le Brigands, and we're going to do a live show from here in my house. And so tune in next week. Next week's live stream, we'll be together, same place, and it should be fun. So I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that. You know, the big thing that I'm looking forward to, which is a good segue, I'm looking forward to getting to actually try one of the bartender's amazing mixed drinks. So I'm finally, y'all, I'm going to get to have a drink that at least reaches maybe close to the caliber of the drinks that Kevin has been having. I'm still like, I'm bracing myself for Shalonda to like give me a drink that's just slightly like not as cool, just to let me know like her man is always gonna be he's always gonna one up me.
No, I think next week is gonna be like the epitome because we're together and I know she's gonna do it all. It's gonna like this. There will be nothing manly about these drinks. Let's put it like that.
They're gonna be the fruitiest possible drinks.
Exactly.
And I will drink it, and y'all can take my man card. That y'all can go ahead and take it. Come, as the sticker says, it was got the AR-15 on it. Come and take it.
But speaking of, that's next week. But speaking of, tonight I've got the she made for me is a Mango Lemon Drop Martini.
Oh my goodness!
Pretty simple tonight.
Liam, solo this, man. Hold that junk up to the camera. Look at this. Look at this.
Yeah.
Look at
pretty
this.
Simple. Man, just pretty simple tonight. You know, you got your standard cherry and mango, and you got your lime, and got your sugar around the rim. You know, just your standard stuff. You know,
man. But the presentation. I mean, the presentation is just—it's incredible, man. Hat tip to Shalonda. Like I say all the time, whatever you're paying her, it's not enough. It's not enough.
She would agree with you.
So what we getting into tonight, man? What we getting into?
Man, so last week, man, we had a great live stream with the Center for Biblical Unity talking about the Iran-Israel stuff. A lot has happened since that last live stream.
Yeah.
And so I was like, we've got to really dive into it tonight. And I felt like the audience would benefit from a voice on this topic other than mine. So we have Dr. Timothy Furnish on with us tonight to help us kind of really break this down and help us understand kind of how we got here and kind of what's coming next. Like, what can we look for moving forward? And so I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, same here. I think that maybe I don't know what it is. I guess maybe we've told people too many times about your credentials and why you know what the heck you're talking about. So. I'm glad that Dr. Tim was willing to come. If people aren't willing to listen to Kev, maybe they'll listen to Dr. Tim. I'm really grateful for him being able to come on. So without further ado, let's bring in Dr. Tim.
Gentlemen, hello.
There he is. Thanks for coming on. We're glad to have you back again.
Glad to be back. Thank you.
For our audience who might not have seen your first episode, just kind of remind everybody who you are and kind of what is your background with this particular topic.
Okay. I was an enlisted Arabic interrogator a few years ago, back when I actually had to get my hair cut. And after that, I went to seminary. Then I went and did a doctorate in Islamic history at Ohio State. Excuse me, the national champion, Ohio State University. Sorry. And so then I taught college, wrote some books on the topic and different topics. And then I also worked for SOCOM for about 5.5 years as an analyst, open source analyst, generally on Islamic movements, terrorist and otherwise. So that's my background. And I actually have been to Iran. Back in 2008, I was invited following my specialization is Islamic eschatology, end time beliefs, which is very prominent in the Shia branch of Islam, particularly the Twelver Shia branch, although it's in the Sunni branch too. And I had given a talk at the Islamic Center of England in West London, which turned out, I didn't know when I went over there, it turned out it's a major Shia, probably the major Shia congregation in the whole of London. And so there were a couple of Imams there, Ayatollahs actually, from Iran. And then I got invited to Iran, and I went for 9 days. This is back in 2008, to a conference they have. So I was in Tehran and in Qom. Qom is the place where all the Ayatollahs get their education, and also is the site of Jamkran Mosque, which is where, according to Shia tradition, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, their main eschatological figure, will reemerge. So I've done a lot of research, particularly on Sunni eschatology, but by having gone to Iran and in subsequent years, I've done quite a bit on Shia Islam as well.
Yeah. So as the audience can see, I'm here, and Dr. Furnish is here. So this is a whole nother level from me talking.
We brought in the big guns.
Absolutely. So just kind of generally, what is your kind of take on where we are at the moment after, the U.S. got involved, bombed the nuclear sites? We have a ceasefire at the moment. Kind of what are your general thoughts about where we are?
I don't think this is going to stop Iran, the Ayatollahs' pursuit of nuclear power, or nuclear weapons, I should say specifically. The Ayatollahs that run Iran, who have been in place since 1979, I think, and this is where I would differ, we can get into the theology of it in a bit, but this is where I would differ with some people. I don't think they want nuclear weapons in order to use them on the Israelis or anybody else, because the Ayatollahs are a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them. And they know if they were to use a nuclear weapon on Israel, or God forbid, get a long-range ICBM and hit San Francisco or something, although one might argue they might clean up the city. But 30 minutes later, Iran will be a radioactive parking lot. So they aren't stupid. And these men, these Ayatollahs who run the country are all, for the most part, except for the few of them that are ascetics, most of them are not ascetics. They're wealthy. They drive expensive cars. They have Rolex watches. I saw those when I went there. Most of them have more than one wife. And they're not going to risk that. They're not going to risk nuclear destruction of all that. Why do they want a nuke? I think they want a nuke because look what's happened when North Korea got a nuke. Now that little rocket man has a nuke, no one will touch him. Why? Because they don't want Seoul or Tokyo to go up in a mushroom cloud. So I think they want it for regime insurance. Now, I will add that if I were Israeli, I'm not sure that I would totally rely on that. So you can kind of understand where the Israelis are coming from. But I think, this argument's going on right now as to whether or not we actually totally destroyed the 3 nuclear sites that we hit with the B-2s. And if we didn't, I'm sure we probably set them back years. I don't think they'll give up on this. As long as that regime's there, they will try to find a way to get a nuclear weapon. Again, I think for insurance, not in order to, as we say, hotwire the apocalypse. So I think Trump did the right thing. There's basically really a 3-way struggle in the Middle East politically for who's going to be top dog in the Muslim world, and that's between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. So the 2 countries besides Israel that are almost certainly the most happy at what President Trump just did are Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Again, I don't think this is not going to end the problem, but I think it will force the Iranians to keep their heads down for a while and maybe maybe draw back on all this support they've been giving to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. And I don't think he's going to. I think Trump is smart enough, clearly, not to try to engage in regime change, if for no other reason that look at what happens with regime change. Sometimes you get a positive result, but often in the Muslim world you don't. I mean, the Arab Spring was not always a nice thing. It didn't always result in good in Jeffersonian democracy. And the key example, I think, is Libya. Remember, we didn't invade Libya, but NATO and the United States under President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton engaged in a protracted bombing campaign of Libya, which helped overthrow Gaddafi. Gaddafi was killed. But mind you, this was after Gaddafi had willingly given up his nuclear program, which he had been working on. It didn't help him any. I mean, maybe not that it should have, but that was sort of an object lesson for other leaders. You give up your nuclear weapons program, the United States might still bomb you. And then what's the ultimate result of that? Libya is basically now a failed state. It has two different governments, one in the west and one in the east. There are pockets of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the oases of the desert. So Libya has turned into a failed state. So the people, there's a lot of folks, particularly on the right, yammering for regime change. Well, Iran has more population than Iraq and Afghanistan put together. And it's a huge country. And it's one thing that would be sure to unite the Iranian people behind the Ayatollahs, whom they generally detest, would be an invasion by us or the Israelis to try to overthrow the government. So President Trump's too smart for that.
Yeah. I do want to challenge something. You mentioned hotwiring the apocalypse.
Uh-huh.
And the Ayatollahs aren't stupid, and they know what would happen to them if they launched a nuke at Israel. 30 minutes later, they'd be a nuclear parking lot. Mm-hmm. You know more about their eschatology. If they thought that doing that would bring back the 12th Imam, and they wouldn't face that because their messianic figure would return, is that part of their, how do they view what brings back the Mahdi? What brings back the 12th Imam?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the key question. And then there's a lot of heat, not a whole lot of light on this issue because, people on Twitter suddenly decide they're an expert on whatever the topic of the day is, right? And especially journalists. And there's been garbage put out about this for years. And I remember some years ago when I wrote my first book and I talked about this sort of thing, Glenn Beck's producers called me up and talked about having me on the show, and they wanted to see a copy of my book. And so I sent them my book, and then suddenly they didn't want to talk to me anymore because I didn't agree with Glenn Beck's viewpoint, which is ironic because I don't know, Glenn's a Mormon, but he seems to have this quite Protestant evangelical Christian view of eschatology, which I never can quite figure out. Maybe sponsors has something to do with that. I'm sorry. Did I say that or think it? That's the key question, Kevin, what you said there. So conventional wisdom on this, and we get a lot of this, particularly from the Republican Party, because the Republican Party, and I don't know if I can't remember if I sent you my article from last Friday where I directly talked about this issue in the stream. I'm a conservative Christian. I am not, however, an evangelical. All conservative, and what's sometimes maddening is that a lot of the Republican politicians, Ted Cruz, Mike Johnson, folks like that, Mike Huckabee, but particularly in Congress, are evangelical Christians. And so their assumption is that the evangelical Christian view is de facto the Christian view. And I point out in my article, no. Turns out that Catholics, who are the largest single denomination in America, Orthodox Christians, who are not many, but some, and then Lutherans, conservative Lutherans, not some of the other Lutheran denominations, basically have a different view on eschatology when it comes to Israel. I mean, for instance, last year, and I'm getting to the issue of Iranian eschatology. I'm getting there.
Yeah.
But conventional wisdom in these circles is that Iran wants a nuclear weapon to do exactly what you said and what I alluded to earlier, which is what we call hotwire the apocalypse. That Iran wants a nuclear weapon in order to take out Tel Aviv, probably Tel Aviv. Well, they don't want to take out Jerusalem because it's pretty important to them too. Take out Tel Aviv, and this will then force Allah's hand, and Allah, God in Islam, will then send the Mahdi, and the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, because they believed that there were 11 Imams descended from Muhammad, and the 12th Imam disappeared in the 9th century AD, and this fellow returned before the end of time as the 12th Imam, who's also the Mahdi, the rightly guided one, the Messiah figure. But the Messiah in Islam is not someone who suffers and atones for the sins of his people. The Messiah in Islam is basically a warlord who will take over the world for Islam.
Yes.
So there's this belief that that you can sort of force Allah's hand. Now, this belief does exist in Sunni and in Shia Islam. However, it is distinctly a minority viewpoint in 12er Shia Islam, which is what the Iranians and most of the Iraqis are. It's very much a minority viewpoint. My research is that there are a few Ayatollahs that believe this, but most of them don't. Most of them adhere to a more mainstream interpretation of 12er Shiism, which is that you can only wage defensive jihad when the Mahdi's not here. So therefore, lobbing a nuke at somebody is not defensive. And that the nukes, basically, you could use a nuke or nukes or conventional weapons offensively once the Mahdi or the 12th Imam has come and then is in charge of your military. But until that time, you can't. So this idea exists in 12er Shiism and also exists to some degree in Sunnism, but it is a minority viewpoint. And so therefore, the people that come on TV and opine so definitively about this is what 12er Shias believe, frankly, don't know what they're talking about. This is, again, it exists, okay? But it is a minority viewpoint. I don't think Khomeini happens to believe this, and he's in charge. Now, as I mentioned earlier, talking about regime change, and be careful what you wish for. You might get something worse. Raisi, remember Raisi, the guy that died in the helicopter crash last year, who was the president?
Yeah.
Who was being groomed, I believe, to become the next supreme leader. And I wonder how that helicopter crashed. Yeah. But that was a smart move, too, by whoever did it. Because this guy, I think, clearly believed that. I think if he had become supreme leader, he's the kind of guy that would have said, we get a nuke, launch it toward the Israelis, because then the 12th Imam will come. So
it is there. It's just not the prominent view.
It is not. It is not the definitive ruling idea of Shia Islam that some people make it out to be. So, and then the other side of that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
No, I was just saying, I'm more familiar with the Sunni side, Salafism and stuff. And so even when we talk about militant Salafism and waging jihad, that is still a minority viewpoint within Salafism itself. Yeah.
Yes. And then you get groups where it exists. For instance, there seem to have been a number of people in ISIS that believed this. If you remember when they had their short-lived caliphate and they ruled part of Syria and Iraq, they always made a point of trying to conquer parts of northern Syria. Why? Well, because there's a town in northern Syria called Dabiq. Dabiq is in one of the hadiths, actually it's in several of the Islamic hadiths, which are the traditions attributed to Muhammad, which says that one of the final, if not the final end-time battle between the forces of Islam and the forces of basically Al-Rum, the Roman Empire, the Christians, the forces of the Western Christians, will be the Eastern Christians either. Pick a side on the Christians, but the forces, the ultimate battle between Christians and Muslims will take place at the town of Dabiq, in which the Mahdi will lead the Muslim forces to victory. So at one point they actually took over Dabiq, and then for a while they published a magazine called Dabiq.
Dabiq. We called it the Beat. Yeah, absolutely. That was the name of their magazine.
Yeah, I used to read it. And it basically said the same thing every time it came out. But the thing was, it legitimately drew, and again, it was a Sunni. The ISIS is Sunni, ISIL, or IS, they're just calling them now. Sunni group, very eschatological, at least some of the people were. And so they seem to actually be trying to pull off this sort of hotwire of the apocalypse thing. I mean, they would talk about, for instance, all those beheadings they would do, and they kidnapped all those Yazidi women and were doing horrible. They basically they reinstituted slavery of people like the Yazidis.
Yes.
Yes. And so they seem to have actually, some of their leadership actually believed that if they kept doing these horrible things to non-Muslims, that would cause the Mahdi to come. So, more level-headed Muslims are like, yeah, you guys make us look bad. So, but the problem with delegitimizing these guys is that they just take these verses right out of the Quran as well as some of the stuff in the Hadith to say, well, we're just literally following them. You wimpy Saudis and Turks and other people, you won't do what it says. So it's really, it's really you can't say they're not. I always hate it when they say they're extremist Muslims. Well, I guess in a sense they are, but really what they are is fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And by the way, as you know, I hate the term Islamist. I think the term Islamist should be stricken from the vocabulary because it's a camouflage term. They're Islamists, as if that's somehow different. No, they're fundamentalist Muslims. Okay.
Yeah.
The doctrines that so-called Islamists are pushing, and I've been hearing Iran lately referred to as Islamist, as if political Islam and jihad is somehow something that isn't part of mainstream Islam. Yes, it is. Thank God the vast majority of the world's Muslims don't follow that stuff. They got better things to do in their lives.
I think that's an attempt to try to view Islam through a Western lens, right?
Exactly. That's very good point. That's a good point. Yes.
Devin, you've been quiet and you've been writing. I know you got something.
I do have a question, and I apologize if I missed this, but is there a common eschatological line that kind of runs through most Islamic sects? What would you say is the common eschatological view among them?
Well, again, between the two major branches, Sunni and Shia, right? People always pretend like those are the only two branches, but there are sects in Islam, and I always have to tell people, especially when I talk to military audiences, don't get excited. I'm saying SECTS. So, if you want to talk about Islamic SEX, that's a whole different lecture. We'll save that.
Lots of variety.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But they do have, Muslims will deny it, but they have denominations too. And even the Sunni, we're just Sunni. Like, no, there's like 27 different branches of Sunni, and there's at least 3 major branches of Shia. So, but yes, commonalities. Islamic eschatology has some commonalities. The world's going to end at some point. Before the world ends, the world will become Muslim. How will the world become Muslim? As I was saying earlier, the Mahdi, if you're Sunni, you just refer to him as the Mahdi. He's never been here yet. He's predicted in hadiths. This is the interesting thing. The idea of the Mahdi is not in the Quran. It's only in the hadiths, the alleged sayings of Muhammad. I've had Shia friends try to talk me, it's in the Quran. I'm like, no, it's not. Dude, I read it. It's not there.
It's not.
You're practicing tortured exegesis if you want to say the Mahdi's there. No, it's not. He's in the hadiths, the sayings of Muhammad, which are only slightly less authoritative than the Quran. For the Sunnis, the Mahdi, the rightly guided one, the guy who will make the entire world Muslim, hasn't been here yet. And this was my first book. It was my doctoral dissertation, which is why nobody read it, because it's boring as hell. Every time you turn a dissertation into a book, it's like, oh, Lord Almighty, you have to take coffee. You have to drink a lot of coffee to read it. But but hey, I got me a contract. What can you say? It sold 17 copies. So there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of people throughout Islamic history in the Sunni world who have claimed to be the Mahdi. And I think maybe we touched on this last time I was here a little bit. Like, for instance, the most famous one was this guy, Muhammad Ahmed, in Sudan back in the 1880s. If you ever seen it, watch the movie with Charlton Heston and Olivier called Khartoum, as in the capital of Sudan, from like 1962, I think it was, where Heston plays General Charles Gordon, who was a British general hired by the Ottomans to go down to Sudan, south of Egypt, which was then technically part of the Ottoman Empire, and try to stop this guy. Didn't work. Gordon wound up decapitated, and the Mahdi took over Sudan and ruled it he died 6 months later of malaria. But But his caliph, Abdullahi, ruled Sudan for 17 more years. Hundreds of thousands of people believed he was the Mahdi, or it was a convenient way to get rid of what they saw as foreign colonizers, which they thought the Turks were. And then 1979 in Saudi Arabia, there was an attempt, you remember this attempt to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia. These guys for 3 weeks occupied the Great Mosque in Mecca. This guy named Jahamin al-Otaibi claimed his brother-in-law, Muhammad al-Qahtani, was the Mahdi. I always wondered if he checked with his brother-in-law. Hey, is it okay if I tell people you're the Mahdi? Because if this doesn't work, dude, we're dead. Which is, of course, what happened. And there have been other examples in history. You can go back in history, and this has happened. Because in the Sunni world, Mahdism has a lot of religious legitimacy, but it's also a very effective revolutionary ideology. If you don't like a target government, you can say, "Oh, the Mahdi's here," and he says, "You're not a good Muslim." But for the Sunnis, there's a Mahdist belief. Pew did a big study back in 2012 on this, and something like 35% of Sunnis said they believe in the Mahdi's coming, which is not a majority, but 35% of 1.8 billion is a lot of people. Now, for the Twelver Shia, it's a little different. For the Twelver Shia, as I was saying, they believe that the Mahdi was here. He was the 12th Imam, descended from Muhammad through Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. And he disappeared in the either 871 or 873 AD, depending how you do the calculations. I'm sorry, as a historian and as a Christian, I just think that he was a very young kid, probably 5 or 6 years old. I just think he probably died. And since they didn't have any agnatic or lineal descendants at all, that branch of the religion was going to die out unless they came up with an explanation of it. So they came up with this explanation. He went into a mystical state of occultation called ghaiba. Ghaiba is like eclipse of the moon. So he's really been here, but he's in hiding. And at some point, Allah will send him forth from the mystical dimension, and he will reemerge onto the stage of history. And then shortly thereafter, Jesus will return. Jesus will come back and reveal that he was a Muslim, and Christians have had it screwed up for a couple of thousand years. And Jesus and the Mahdi will then operate together to take over the world for Islam. And then so you'll have that, and then so those are the commonalities with the eschatology. The big both Sunni and Shia, and most sects of Islam, except for a couple that believe the Mahdi's already been here, like the Ahmadis. If you ever heard of the Ahmadis, the Ahmadis are mainly in India, but there's quite a large contingent of them in Britain, and there's also a few of them in Canada. They believe that a guy that lived in the late 19th, early 20th century was the Mahdi and Jesus combined. And then you've heard of the Baha'is. You've probably heard of the Baha'is.
I was going to ask you about them later, because so you didn't send me your article, but I did read your article. And you mentioned them, and you mentioned how the Ayatollahs are always concerned about them, right, because their headquarters is in northern Israel. Right. So who are they?
Yeah, the Baha'is are a group descended. Their leader was a guy named Baha'u'llah, which means something like sign of Allah in Persian. Baha'u'llah lived in the 19th century, early 20th century, late 19th century. He was preceded by a guy in Iran called the Bab. The Bab literally means the gate or the door, who is sort of like the John the Baptist figure. This guy showed up in Qajar, Iran, late 19th century, mid-late 19th century, about the time of the American Civil War, and said, the 12th Imam is about to return, but the 12th Imam is going to be a little different than standard issue beliefs. The 12th Imam is also going to be the messianic fulfillment of Judaism and Christianity. So the 12th Imam is also going to be not just the Muslim Messiah, but the Jewish Messiah, and also the reincarnation, if you will, of Jesus. So that's basically what they taught. So this guy was preaching this, and then the guy that was said to be that person was the Baha'u'llah. And interestingly enough, so he showed up, and this is in late 19th century Iran, and you would think they would have put him to death just to end the issue, but they didn't. They actually just exiled him, and he wound up he wound up in the Ottoman Empire, and at that time, what is now Israel, Palestine, was ruled by the Ottomans. So the Ottomans let him set up shop in Haifa. So that became and he stayed there till he died. He's basically kind of put under house arrest, but that's where he lived. So the Baha'i World headquarters, Kevin, as you pointed out, is in Haifa. And this became one of the elements of why Iranians in general, but particularly the Ayatollahs after the Islamic Revolution, came to really, really, really dislike the Israelis and also to oppress the Baha'is that remained in Iran, because they thought that because Haifa was the world headquarters of the Baha'is, that there was that the Baha'is in Iran were basically operating as a fifth column for Mossad and for Israel. And so they were already being persecuted because it got to the point, especially with the Islamic Revolution. Some of this went under the Shah, but it got really bad, of course, under the Ayatollahs after 1979. Anybody that wasn't Shia Muslim was basically persecuted. I mean, the tiny the tiny Christian community, the tiny Zoroastrian community that survived. But the Baha'is particularly came under a lot of duress because this alleged connection with Israel.
Tim, let me ask you this. This has been really good. And I think people have a better understanding of the end times of the Iranian regime and Shia Muslims and stuff. Well, we got to talk about it because this is one of the things in your article. And I think this is the question everyone wants to know. Why does Iran or the Ayatollahs hate Israel so much?
Yeah. The thing about the Baha'is is the number 3 reason in that article I wrote. There are 2 other big reasons. The first one is there's just a whole lot of don't say anti-Semitism, yes, because I know Arabs are Semites also. It's an ethno-linguistic term. So I tend to say anti-Jewish. There's a lot of anti-Jewish thought just in Islam. The Quran says very negative things about Jews. And there's also a whole lot of negative stuff about Jews in the hadiths. If you go into the hadiths, which again, the Quran, according to Muslims, is literally the word of Allah, basically transcribed, dictated to Muhammad, and then later written down. There's no room for interpretation. It's not Muhammad's 2 cents worth or Muhammad's view. It's literally the word of Allah. The hadiths are these multi-volume collections of sayings that were put together after Muhammad's death, which purport to be the sayings of Muhammad. Although there's a lot of argument even in the Islamic world as to which ones of these are legitimate and which ones are not. But anyway, so both the Quran and the Hadith have very negative things about Jews. You also have the historical example. I didn't really go into this in my article, but this is important. I probably should have. There's also a very formative negative historical event in the early Islamic community between Muslims and Jews, and this was what happened after Muhammad. Muhammad and the early Islamic community left the town of Mecca in 622 AD on what was called the Hijra, the pilgrimage, the migration, not pilgrimage, that's Hajj. The migration, they left and went up 100 miles or so north to a town called Yathrib, which later became known as Medina to Nebi, the city of the prophet, shortened to Medina. Or if you're in Ohio, they call it Medina, but it's actually Medina. And my wife's from Ohio, and I'm Medina, Ohio, and I'm like, oh, that's not the same as the one in Saudi Arabia. But
it's kind of like Arab, Alabama.
Oh, yeah, goodness. Yes, please tell me that's not what they call it. Please tell me.
It is.
Oh, man.
Yes. Which reminds me, I remember when I was in the 101st, there was a fellow interrogator in my unit in 311th MI who was from South Carolina. And this guy, I kid you not, spoke Arabic with a Southern accent. It was horrible.
On behalf of all South Carolinians, I apologize. I am from South Carolina.
You don't have an accent, though. He was like, As-salamu alaikum. And you're like,
oh,
no. Please shut up.
No.
Nicest guy in the world, but oh my God, he could not. Even when he spoke Arabic, he couldn't lose that Southern accent.
So Iran hating Israel the lot of negative stuff in the Quran.
There's
and
just
Hadiths.
General Islamic negative stuff
Yeah.
that's common to both Sunnis and Shias. And then you had this thing where in probably 627, we're not sure exactly, but sometime in this period when Muhammad was in Medina, the ruler of Medina, and the Islamic community had relocated there, part of the deal with him relocating was that all of the tribes and all of the people living in Medina would convert to Islam. Well, it turned out that there was a tribe there that was Jewish, probably had come there, probably been there for hundreds of years after the Romans had, destroyed the temple and done all that stuff. They probably fled down there. They'd been there for a long time, their descendants or their ancestors. And so they refused to convert. And the Islamic story is that after they refused to convert, and supposedly they were also plotting to have Muhammad removed or killed. Well, Muhammad ordered, and again, this is according to the Islamic histories, Muhammad ordered all of the men beheaded and all of the women divvied up, the women and children were divvied up as spoils of war among the Muslims. So this is, according to the Islamic chronicler, between 600 and 900 men were beheaded, and they were all Jewish. So that, needless to say, is sort of sets the tone of bad blood between the two. And then the other reason is that once you narrow sort of down from just the general Islamic stuff in the Quran and the Hadiths, there are specific Shia Hadiths that the Sunnis don't believe in. Because the Shia believe that sayings have authority not just of Muhammad, but of the 12 Imams. So the 11 Imams, including most notably Ali, who is in many ways considered to be sort of the founder of Shiism, because he was Muhammad's much younger cousin and his son-in-law, because he married Muhammad's daughter Fatima. And so there are hadiths that come through him that say more specific negative things about the Jews. For instance, that the main contingent of followers of the Dajjal, who's basically the Muslim Antichrist figure, will be Jewish. And that the Antichrist figure at the end times that the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, and Jesus have to fight, his vanguard will be Jewish. So basically the implication is that Jews will support the wrong side when it comes to the eschatological end times. So all of the stuff gets rolled together. Plus, you have all this political stuff. Really, the political stuff is just as important, I think, because then I point out in the article, and I'm sure you saw it, where basically Iran uses the Sunni Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia's refusal, as they see it, to help the Palestinians as a club with which to beat them, and they use that for propaganda. Like, oh, look, we're the ones supporting. We're not even Sunni, and we're supporting Hamas, and as well as Shia groups like Hezbollah. And so they try to sort of shame and make the Sunni Arab countries look bad vis-a-vis their support for the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Devin, you got something. You're writing a lot, man.
Yeah. So I'm trying to keep track of all this. This is a lot. Now, I love this. Right? Like, this is the spirit of the show. We really want people to be informed about this stuff. You hear a lot of talking back and forth about these things. And I feel like, quite honestly, Dr. Tim, you're correcting some of my own misunderstandings about many of these things. So this is fantastic. One of the things that, just as we're talking about this, I'm trying to think about what the average common person might be asking if we have held on to them at this point, because we're going deep, right? And correct me if this is just a foolish question, but when we think about the motivation of many of the Muslim groups to commit certain acts of terror, to go on certain sort of campaigns of conquest, do you think that there is a differing level of dangerousness to the ideology of either the Sunni or the Shia Muslims? Is one more dangerous than the other, or more violent than the other?
That's a good question. But and I will say this: no, there's no. I remember in basic training, the drill sergeant would always say, "There's no such thing as a stupid question." And Kevin, you know this. What's the first thing he'd say when you ask a question? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Maybe that was just my drill sergeants. Anyway, didn't matter what level. Yeah. So what's interesting is that if you look at the State Department foreign terrorist organization list, and I have it somewhere here on my shelf. I won't walk away and look for it, but there's something like 78 groups on that list, and something like 69 or 68 of them are Islamic. And I think, if I remember correctly, last time I looked at it was in January. Only 2 of them are Shia. The vast majority of the world's Muslim terrorist groups are Sunni. Because, as Kevin pointed out earlier, the particular Sunni fundamentalism, which is generally called Salafism, because they purport to follow what they call as-salaf, the pious ancestors. They basically say that they're just trying to do what they did, the Muslims at the time of Muhammad did. They call them the salaf, the pious ancestors. And again, Islamic fundamentalism basically they will go to the jihad verses of the Quran, of which there are quite a few, and say, we're just going to do exactly what this says. And that's why they're fundamentalists, and that's why there are so many of them in the Sunni world. The Twelver Shia world, basically, there actually is more leeway in Shiism, even Twelver Shiism, and there were 2 other branches of Shiism too, that allow for, there's leeway that allows for non-literal interpretation of Quranic verses. There's some leeway for that. And so it is true in some ways that the Shia are not bound strictly by exactly what the Quran says in the same way that the Sunnis are. And then that is why outside of Iran, historically, outside of Iran, really since the 1979 revolution, historically, Shiism has tended to be really sort of, if you will, almost more moderate. Again, there are 2 other major branches of Shiism. There's what's called Fivers and Seveners. Fivers are called Zaydis. This is the Shia that are in Yemen. And, the Houthis. The Houthis are what are called Zaydi Shia. Fibers. And, they haven't been too moderate lately, but a lot of that has been because that's a whole different issue, probably a whole different show. But a lot of that is frankly instigated by the Iranians because they don't have any other friends in the Arab world whatsoever. And the Iranians basically went in there starting in the mid-late 80s and started saying, although you're not exactly the same kind of Shia as us, we'll support you with money, and we'll also give you some missiles if you will lob some at Israel and maybe the Saudis when you get a chance. And so they went for that hook, line, and sinker. But there's another branch of Shiism called Sevener Shias, also called Ismailis. And what these Zaydis, Ismailis, they basically, and plus those numbers, that means that they trace, remember I said there were 12 imams. They pick who was the final authoritative imam at a different point. The Fivers say it was the 5th imam, the Seveners say it was the 7th imam, and then the Twelvers, who are the majority of Iran and Iraq, say it has to go through the 12, down to the 12th imam. Can't tell the player's not a program. It's a bit complex, but the Seveners, who are under the global leadership of a guy called the Aga Khan, if you've ever heard of this guy, lives in England. They are quite moderate. They have reinterpreted they have reinterpreted jihad to mean simply, truly just being a good Muslim and doing good deeds. And they have, I've looked at their website. They say that jihad is things like they sponsor like desalinization plants in Tanzania and immunization programs and things like that. I mean, they're really sort of like a global health NGO. That's how they define jihad. So that's a little different than the way most people in the Islamic world define jihad. So I don't know if I'm answering your question very well, but basically there's a reason that most of the world's terrorist groups are Sunni. It's because it's Sunni fundamentalism that says you have to basically read the Quran woodenly, literally, and apply the jihad verses, whereas Shias sometimes say you don't always have to do it like that.
That's very interesting. That kind of leads me to another question around that is that, you talk about some of these, Muslims who they allow for looser interpretation or more symbolic interpretation.
Or just interpretation at all, instead of just a literal reading. To allow an interpretation is a radical idea in Islam. This is why I didn't mean to cut you off. this is why I said at the start of this, I really don't like the term extremist and that sort of thing, because it's not extremist to read the Quran and say, I'm going to do literally what it says. In Christianity, that tends to be seen by some people as extremist.
Right.
Because there are many Christians and many Christian churches, I'm including what's the largest Christian church, Catholic Church. Since the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church has said there are various ways of interpreting the Bible, allegorical and tropical and metaphorical and symbolic and all this different stuff. In Islam, the mainstream interpretation, particularly in the Sunni world, has always been you literally have to read it and do what it says. If you take if you say, oh, that's the beheading passages, I wrote this article years ago on beheading, which is still the one that's like my most important article ever, which is kind of sad. I wish I could write something that would sort of displace that as my most influential article. But nobody else has really ever studied beheading like that. And so basically I went through because this was back when ISIS and Al-Qaeda were doing all those beheadings. And I kept seeing these Muslim spokespeople come on TV and say, that has nothing to do with Islam. I'm like, what do you mean it has nothing to do with Islam? There's two different passages of the Quran that say behead the unbelievers. I mean, Sean Hannity didn't make it up. So Donald Trump didn't make it up. It's right there. So
I'll add this, Tim. I'll add this because it's not so much even about the Quran. It's really a lot more to do with the Hadith and the Sunnah, right? It's the actions of Muhammad. It's like the story you told earlier, what Muhammad did to those Jews who didn't convert. Right. They beheaded all of them. And so these guys are just doing what Muhammad did.
And I remember, how can you be an extremist if you're doing what the founder of the religion says? No, the extremists are the people that go out on a limb, like the Shia, some of the Shia I've been talking about, also some of the Islamic mystical groups that are called Sufis. Some of them will say, no, beheading your opponent means, when you're debating them and you're basically cutting off their arguments, it doesn't mean literally chopping the guy's head off. And again, most Muslims are like, yeah, I'm okay with that because I got to make a living and I got to get up and go to work tomorrow. I don't have time to go out and behead people. The vast majority of the world's Muslims are like that. However, there's 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. So even if 1% believe this, that's 18 million people, right? Yeah. So that's the problem.
It is. Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah. I'm just, so it sounds like this, sort of these folks who I'll put it in air quotes and say liberal Muslims that you've described who are okay with interpretation, right?
Let's say moderate. I'll go with moderate.
Moderate. Okay. These moderate Muslims, which, it's like, that we call some of them extreme, we call some of them moderate. And I agree with you that it's kind of weird to call them extreme. It's like, no, they're just following the text, right? Yeah. Like I get irritated when people call Christians who follow the Bible and treat the Bible literally, they call us extremists or fundamentalists. I'm like, no, I'm following the text. You're inserting something in there that's not there, right? I think it's weird.
Yeah, but here's the thing: to be an extremist Christian means you will, love your neighbor as yourself and turn the other cheek when somebody hits you. All right?
Yeah.
Unless you want to try fasting. Unless you want to try fasting for 40 days out in the desert, okay, that's there too. So, but that generally doesn't hurt anybody else. To be a literalist fundamentalist Muslim, Surat al-Tawbah says, behead the unbelievers when you encounter them, and then fight them until they submit. That they submit or die. And I'm like, well. So what happens is the media and commentators and policymakers they equate extremist with violent.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. But that's not what extremist means. Okay. That's not what extremist means. And so I'm sorry. I mean, I remember being at a conference a few years ago, 10 years or so ago. Actually, I was working for SOCOM and I got sent to a conference in Washington on Libya. No, it was on Iraq. They sent me to one on Libya, sent me to one on Iraq. So I'm at this conference with a bunch of, inside the Beltway eggheads and including like some State Department people. And, you can always tell the State Department people because literally they wear two-tone shoes. It's like, oh, give me a break. And they had nice creases in their pants, unlike me. But we're sitting there talking about some stuff having to do with Iraq and, how to try to get out of the morass that we're in and that sort of stuff. And the State Department guy starts talking about how there's all the stuff about the extremists, and we just need to do something because they aren't really Muslims and stuff like that. I mean, and he wasn't a Muslim; he was just a typical arrogant American State Department's guy. And then I finally turned to him and I said, "Have you ever actually read the Quran?" And he said, I'm sure he had his nose up in the air too, because I'm sure he'd been to Harvard, unlike me. Although we have a better football team than Harvard. So he said fired. To me, I mean, God, beating up on Harvard. Wow. But he said to me, I don't have to. And I'm like, oh, there's your answer. You don't have to read the Quran. So you don't know anything about it. But you're sitting here telling us who's a Muslim and who's not, So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. That's a fantastic example of the mentality, because it's like, I don't have to read the Quran. I decide who's a real Muslim, because the attitude is, they are an oppressed group. They're one of us. And so like we Kevin decide earlier, who's in and who's
that's
out.
That's applying a Western, like Kevin said, it's applying a Western viewpoint. It's like, I mean, talk about colonialism. And I'm sorry, but Bush did it. President Obama did it. Biden did whatever his teleprompter said. It was basically, Obama and Bush and Obama would come on and tell us what was and what isn't Islam. I'm like, you have no idea what is and isn't Islam. Why don't you let the Muslims speak for themselves?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And have they not spoken for themselves in what we've seen and what has transpired in world events? And so my question then, you're leading right into it essentially, is this whole idea of the moderate Muslim. This Islam is a religion of peace thing that we keep hearing. Do you think that these moderate Muslims really are moderate, or is it the sort of thing where if the Islamic campaign to try to conquer the world starts to gain, just let's play pretend here, it starts to gain traction and it starts to gain a foothold, do you think they become more fundamentalist if it becomes more popular or more acceptable, or they see that Muslims are winning? Do you think that this whole is religion of peace thing continues, this moderate Muslim thing continues?
No. I mean, look at what's happening in Europe, Devin. What's happening in England? What's happening in France? No. Again, most Muslims, I think, want to come here for a good reason, or want to come to Europe or want to come to the United States just to improve their lives. But there's a substantial minority in those groups that come over here, and those people that come here that want, they want to change society. I mean, I was listening to who was I listening to today? Maybe it was Megyn Kelly, but they were playing a video from a Muslim Brotherhood spokesperson from some years ago. They said, we're not coming here to assimilate. We're coming here to make this country Muslim. And one way to do it is come here and have a lot of babies. I mean, but look at what's happening in Paris. You see these pictures in Paris when there's people out in the street. And it's like, it's one thing to come to a country and say, hey, we're going to respect your rules, we're going to respect your culture. It's not to come here and say, we're going to change your culture and you're intolerant if you don't let us change your culture. I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
Oh, the Brits are in trouble.
The Brits are in trouble. I mean, look, the British police in London and other places are arresting people that criticize Islam. It's just insane. They have no First Amendment. They have no those people. They arrest Christians for praying outside of abortion clinics, and Muslims are stabbing people in the streets. Or, of course, the rape gangs, the grooming and rape gangs. I mean, they did finally come out with some info about that and some report. What Parliament came out with a report on that. But yet, a bunch of the men that have done it haven't been deported.
Yeah. I want to turn it back to Iran, Israel, or Iran, as someone on X corrected me.
I say Iran. I figured, I was like, there's no way they pronounce it Iran.
I'm from Alabama. We have Arab. Okay.
Stop the madness.
But do you think? I know you say you don't think that it stopped their ambitions, but with the destruction of Hamas, the destruction of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and now the nuclear program kind of gone, do you think Iran has been neutralized as a threat to the region? I know you mentioned kind of that great power game between them and Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Has Iran basically been cut off at the knees right now?
Yeah, for now. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes them to recover. I mean, the Iranians are smart people, and they're not probably going to be down for long. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'm hoping there's going to be some sort of intrinsic indigenous movement against the Ayatollahs, but I don't know how they gain power. Of course, we thought that about Gaddafi too, and it happened to him. But I think that. I mean, Iran is potentially a rich country. They got, the third or fourth largest oil reserves in the world. China's not going to stop buying their oil. And although Putin seems to have backed off a little bit on his support for them, they're still sort of de facto allied with the Russians. So I don't think they'll suffer for trade partners. They trade with Pakistan. They trade with India. And they've actually, they developed sort of an interesting, now they've been exporting drones. They've been making some pretty decent drones from what I understand. The Russians been buying them. So again, it's not Afghanistan. This is a highly educated populace with a lot of resources. God knows what they could be if they weren't fettered by these hardcore ideologues running the country. But I just don't see that stopping anytime soon. I think what they'll do is they'll lay low. We don't know whether they move some of that enriched uranium. They were supposedly at 60% enrichment, right? And did they move some of that out? We don't know. I'm not sure they have a whole lot of surviving scientists to work on these programs, but they probably got some. What is it? You have to get 90, 85 or 90% for weapons grade? Is that what it is, Kevin?
Yeah, 90%.
Yeah. So they were getting there. I'm not sure they have any centrifuges left, but again, they may have had other sites with centrifuges and such that we don't know about. I think they will do it as surreptitiously as possible. They're not going to let the IAEA in there anytime soon. So I think that, as I said earlier, I think that their support for Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis will be greatly curtailed for a while. But short of regime change, they're not going to change. Tiger doesn't change its stripes. They still have the same objectives, and their anti-Americanism, anti-Israelism is a plank of the Islamic Republic, and they're not going to give that up. So I think they'll keep their heads down. They'll keep their heads down for a while, but this doesn't fundamentally change the nature of who's running the country.
Yeah. I don't know. It just baffles me because you would think it's kind of like what Hamas wasted all that time, money, and energy and resources, basically hating Israel and trying to fight Israel. Yeah. It seems like Iran is doing the same thing. They're wasting time, resources, efforts, sending all this money. Like, you would think if they just wanted to be a thriving country that they would stop all of this nonsense, stop screaming, stop chanting death to America and death to Israel, stop saying you're going to wipe Israel off the map, and maybe you can have a peaceful nuclear program with people saying, and people would trust you to have it. Why not just be a decent person, a decent regime, and then live with everybody else?
Because they're ideologues. And, again, they are convinced. The leadership, for the most part, is hardcore 12er Shia. As I said earlier, they don't all believe in nuking Israel, but they all believe in hating Israel. Because
they all want to destroy Israel, maybe not just with a nuke.
I think they would all like to see Israel destroyed. I'll put it that way. Some of them are willing to wait for the Mahdi to come and do it. which means they're going to be waiting for a long, long time. But this is a plank of their it's part of their domestic policy too, So they use it to stay in power, and it's become conventional wisdom. It's entrenched. You can't question it now. If you question it, I can't believe an Iranian politician would come and say, hey, you know what? Why don't we try talking to the Americans or Israelis? Because they just can't. They're ideologically blinkered, and it's part of how they stay in power. And plus, there's a lot of money at stake. I mean, the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guards Corps, is sort of like the PLA in China. They run economic enterprises. They run companies. They're engaged in the drug trade. I'm sure they're finding a way to get a cut of what's going on in Afghanistan. In Central Asia as well. So there are too many vested interests in keeping the hatred going and keeping the vitriol going. And short of regime change, I don't see that change anytime soon.
Yeah. Go ahead, Devin.
Do you think that we hear about the Persians, right? The non-Arab Iranian people, and we hear that they could actually outnumber Arab Iranians, 2 to 1. Do you think that there is actually enough will and desire among those people to take their country back?
Well, Devin, let me make sure. The Persians are the majority ethnic group there, 52%.
Right.
The largest non-Persian ethnic group is the Azeris, who are about 24-25% related to the people from Azerbaijan. Arabs only make up, 5% of the population or something like that. You've got...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's Ahvaz, there's Turkmen, there's several other groups. But 3/4, a slight majority is Persian, ethnic Persian. And then the largest single contingent below that, again, is Azeri. And in fact, Khamenei is not an ethnic Persian. He's an ethnic Azeri, which is a totally separate language and everything, although, he's very Persianized, of course. The question, I guess, I'm going to modify that a little bit, basically is what a lot of people don't realize is Iran is sort of a polyglot state. It is only slightly, as I said, slightly majority Persian. There's very large factions of minority groups there. Now, the vast majority of them are 12 or Shia in religion, but they aren't the same ethno-linguistically as the Persians. And the question would be, is there any way, is it possible that they might kind of get tired of living under the Persian yoke, if you will? I remember we talked about that back when I worked at SOCOM. This is probably, 15 years ago. I've never seen anything's really coming to that. The only group that I've seen where that's an issue really has been the Baluch or the Baloch. I don't know if you're the Balochistan is, if you look at the map, look at the ethno-linguistic map of the region, it is far eastern Iran, and it goes over into Pakistan. Far western Pakistan and far eastern Iran, bordering the Indian Ocean, is an area dominated by an ethno-linguistic group called the Baluch or the Baloch. They are Sunni Muslims, and they are ethnically different from the Persians. They don't like the Iranians. In fact, there's a Baluch terrorist group that's been fighting against the Iranians that sometimes kills Iranian generals. And however, they also cause problems for the Pakistanis because basically they're kind of like the Kurds. They want a Baluchistan, but their territory straddles the territories, the borders between Iran and Pakistan. And so neither one of them like them very much because although they're Sunni Muslims like the Pakistanis, they're not Pakistani. So that is the only group I really know of in recent history that has actively been trying to get out from under Iranian rule.
But even if it wasn't, Tim, even if it wasn't an ethnic thing, just the Iranian people in general, what is the general sentiment towards the regime? Is there a large contingency
Kevin, I don't think anybody knows.
To raise it?
I don't think anybody knows. I keep, I don't know if you know Waleed Ferris. Waleed is on Newsmax and some stuff. I know Waleed some years ago. I met him at ASME, Association for the Study of Middle East and Africa conference. And I saw where he recently posted something about that. Most Iranians don't like the regime. I'm like, well, y'all keep saying that. What's your metric for that? Where did you get that? It's like, some of my Christian friends, keep seeing this stuff that, you've probably seen this. Oh, there are mass conversions to Christianity in Iran. I'm like, well, I keep hearing that, but I don't see any evidence of that. Can somebody, again, I know it's a closed society, and if it were happening, the Ayatollahs would hide it as much as they could. But I'd like some data on that rather than just assertions. Yeah. And so
it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get data because I know some, and basically, they have to just not say it.
Yeah, right.
It's so underground.
My brother-in-law goes to Armenia every so often to work some churches there, and he says, in Armenia you'll get Iranians that come out. And he says, and he's heard from that. Again, this is anecdotal, however, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, people don't like the Ayatollahs and stuff. And so, I'm sure a lot of people don't like the Ayatollahs. The question is, to what degree are we talking about? Is it the degree of like they're willing to rise up, are willing to do something? Or is it just that, they control the organs of violence and there's nothing we can do about it?
Yeah. All right, Tim, I appreciate you taking the time with us. We've taken a lot of your time.
No, we haven't wasted.
But okay, so final question: Iran, Israel. What do you see next? Where do we go from here? What do you think is what do you think is the next steps in this? Is this do you think it's a time of peace? Do you think there's more conflict? What do you think is going to happen?
Cold War. It's Israeli-Iranian Cold War. That's what it's going to be. I mean, they'll find ways to get at each other. Although, Dad just stepped in and told them to stop fighting because they don't know what the F they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you think about that guy, you got to admit that was pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like cheering that guy, and the other times I'm like going, "What the blazes?"
That was my reaction to that.
Yeah.
My reaction to him saying that was essentially that just solidly demonstrates that you do not understand the dynamics over there at all. You think everything is some sort of like trade deal that we can get to to some sort of win-win situation. He doesn't factor in actual religious beliefs at all. He doesn't think it matters.
That's such a good observation. I remember before Trump went out last time when he was president, first time, he advanced, and it was really quite a good plan because I wrote a big article. I read the whole thing; it was like 100 pages long, and I wrote a big article for it in the stream. He advanced this big plan about how the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, here's a plan to build hotels and make a big tourist industry, and we'll get 5G, and you guys will be rich, so rich, richer than anybody, but I mean, it was a really good plan, but it's Trump, real estate guy, right? Real estate guy, Trump. Well, don't you just want to make money? I'm like, no, some people, to steal a line from The Dark Knight, some people just want to see the world burn.
That's right. That's right. And he doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand that.
He doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think he knows enough not to get troops involved in that. He's like, if we're going to do something about it, we're going to drop some bombs from a B-2 and then we're going back to Missouri. Okay. And then now y'all can sort it out. Yeah. I just think it's going to be a constant low-grade conflict. Iran is not going to give up. Take sniping at Israel. At some point, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis will go back to launching missiles at them or doing what they can as soon as, if there's any way they can. I mean, Hamas does seem to have been largely obliterated, but the Hezbollah is still sitting up there in southern Lebanon with a whole lot of missiles themselves. We don't know what's going to happen with Syria. I mean, Syria has got basically a former ISIS guy in charge, ISIS Al-Qaeda guy in charge, and they don't like the Iranians, but they sure don't like Israel much either. So, maybe the enemy of my enemy is my friend there with Syria and Iran. So, and then Israel will, of course, keep up finding ways to disrupt Iran's nuclear program, which I'm pretty sure they'll probably go back to. I mean, I remember a few years ago they did that Stuxnet virus, that malware, which totally screwed them up. So, and Israel, as we've seen, has actually had people on the ground operating, and they had a drone base. Remember this? They said they had a drone base operating. I'm like, oh my gosh. So, the Israelis don't mess around, and you can't blame them because their national existence depends on it. So I think that Iran will lay low for a while, but as soon as they think they're capable of it, they'll get back to doing whatever they can to Israel, and Israel will respond.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, we appreciate you being on, and we appreciate all you being willing to share your knowledge with our audience and with us. And folks, if you have more questions about this, send them in. We may be nice and ask Dr. Tim on your behalf. But we really appreciate you being willing to lend your expertise to the show.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks. And let me tell you, it's informed speculation. I mean, I spent all these years studying the Middle East, and sometimes I go I have no bloody idea what's going on. So
you got a lot better idea than us.
Well, I think my speculation is probably better than a lot of people's, but I think only the Lord Himself knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. All right, well, Tim. Well, we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.
Yeah. Have a good one, man.
Hey, man, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think our audience is going to really benefit from the knowledge and the nuggets that Dr. Tim was dropping tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch this show and want to get informed, like I said, there were things that I thought that got soundly corrected tonight. I'm sure many of our listeners maybe had some of their assumptions challenged, and maybe I'm sure some people will probably pull up a clip of us saying something before that Dr. Tim kind of soundly refuted. But that's why we do this. I mean, that's why we do this, is because we're not interested in just running our mouths or being talking heads spouting our opinion. We really want to be informed, and we want the folks out there in YouTube land and beyond to be informed. So I think it was awesome. It's exactly the kind of stuff that we aim to do on this show.
Absolutely. But with that said, hey, next week, guys, live stream. Devin and I are going to be together. It's going to be awesome. We're both going to have fruity drinks. So so don't miss it. But hey, we want to thank y'all for joining us each and every week. You guys are the best. Please like, subscribe, share, tell others about it. Check out Devin over at Podium Studios, where you can get all of your podcast and marketing and media needs met. Don't forget the merch store, our diverse, inclusive merch store.
That's right.
And until next time, stay informed.
Stay informed, folks.